Germany's got a legally binding commitment to net zero by 2045 and some pretty challenging targets by 2030. Is this election going to affect that ability to meet those targets?
Emissions in the energy sector have been going down considerably. We are on the path to phase out coal by 2030. The target that the last government has set was 80% renewables by 2030. And I'd say the new government will stick to that target. So energy really is performing well. Building and transport, not at all.
Hello, I'm Bryony Worthington, and this is Cleaning Up. On February the 23rd, Germany headed to the polls to elect a new chancellor and a new government. And my guest this week is Patrick Graichen, a former energy and climate minister in the last government as a representative of the Green Party. Prior to entering government, Patrick ran the think tank Agora Energiewende, which he set up following an earlier period in government working on energy from 2001 to 2012. As he's had a front row seat influencing and tracking the German Energiewende, I could think of no one better to explore the new political landscape and the likely implications, both nationally and for Europe and beyond. He's also experienced firsthand how politics can prevent progress if public opinion swings against you, as he was responsible for a highly contested policy to phase out gas boilers and phase in heat pumps. So I was keen to ask him what he's learned during that phase. Of course, there are also questions about the German car industry, nuclear power, and the future of gas. So plenty of big topics to dig into. Please join me in welcoming Patrick Graichen to Cleaning Up. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us on Cleaning Up. I wanted to start with our first question, which is always, please could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and why?
Well, thanks, Bryony. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. Well, I've been in the energy and climate space for more than 20 years now. I used to work in the environment ministry. Then I co-founded a think tank called Agora Energiewende. That's where we met, discussing how to move the energy transition in Germany and Europe and UK. And then in 2021, I became state secretary for energy and climate here in Germany, pushed the energy transition through and had to manage an energy crisis because of the war of Russia against the Ukraine. And now I am a private consultant on energy and climate issues. You can hire me. And I am supervisory board member of the Ukrainian TSO.
Fantastic. And just to clarify a couple of those points. So when you say Secretary of Energy, in the German context, that's kind of equivalent to a minister in the UK?
That's a vice minister, if you'd say so. So it's, I'd say in the UK context, it's the one below the minister.
Fantastic. And obviously this was as a part of the coalition government and representing the Green Party.
Yes, so it was the traffic light coalition, which then fell apart last year, and the Greens and me in charge of energy and climate issues.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for setting the scene. And of course, the reason we're talking today is because we've just had a German election. And I really was so delighted that you agreed to come on and talk to us about this. There's so much in the media about the election. Obviously, from our perspective, we're really interested in what it means for climate and energy and for Europe. But perhaps we can just start with, we will all know the basics of the result. We've got a new chancellor and a likely new coalition of two parties. But talk to us a little bit about what happened to the Green Party during that election.
Well, the Green Party is kind of, on the one hand, is the second best results for the Greens since they were founded. 11.6%, I think, was the final result. On the other hand, it's less than last time and a lot less compared to the expectations, in the sense that Robert Habeck was running to be chancellor. So at the end of the day, it is in difficult times where not only in Germany but everywhere there is a backlash, an anti-climate backlash, that the Greens were performing okay, one would have to say.
But as of today, they won't be part of the coalition government,
No.
so will be in opposition, joining AFD as the other major party of opposition. And how are people feeling about this?
Well, actually, I think it is better that the Greens are part of the opposition, and not only the AfD, the right wings, and the left party. It's Social Democrats and Christian Democrats who are going to form the government. And for all those that are going to be disappointed of their policy, there's the Greens as a democratic middle type of alternative at the next election, and not just, okay, they didn't succeed, let's vote for AfD or left.
I guess, do you feel like being outside the coalition, you're not going to be blamed? Because often there's a sort of, the minor parties in the last coalition have suffered, right? I mean, everyone's suffered from having been in government.
Yeah, I mean, that's, of course, the typical thing. That one has to admit the traffic light coalition, so Social Democrats, red, the Liberals, yellow, and the Greens, was not at all liked by the population. And that had a lot to do with lots of internal fights. There was no coherent messaging at all, mostly due to the Liberals, but there was a lack of trust between those three parties, and that is, of course, nothing you can really build a coalition upon, and that's why it fell apart at the end of last year. And I guess that is also a lesson. I mean, if you don't really get a good trusting relationship between the partners, then it's not worth it. And that means it's better to be a good opposition than being part of a coalition that just doesn't work.
So let's then turn to the sort of new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz. We're going to see CDU be the major party in this coalition now. What do we know about him and his party and their views about climate? And obviously, there's a lot on his plate. You've got defence issues, you've got migration issues, but on energy, which is very linked to the economy, what does he stand for?
Well, first of all, Friedrich Merz is coming from the right wing of the Christian Democrats. So he has been interested in running on all security and migration issues. Now he's faced with a geopolitical situation where Europe is threatened by both Trump and Putin, where he'll have no second of leaning back, but has to perform from the first minute on. And having that in mind, energy or climate is, I think, the 20th priority in his mind, if at all. And he has said that during the campaign. So there has been, yes, we want to have nuclear back. Yes, I don't like those windmills type of slogans in the campaign by Merz. So what you'd expect from conservatives who doesn't really like the energy transition. But it has never been important to him. And I would presume that in that new coalition with the Social Democrats, it's rather the Social Democrats that then will have the responsibility for energy issues. And we'll see more or less a continuation of energy transition policies as we have had them in the past 20 years.
But if he's going to focus on economic growth and what I'm interested in is, there's been a lot of narrative about high energy prices, regulations forcing industries out of Germany. I mean, how much of that is actually going to be part of his agenda? Because he has said, we've got to get back to economic growth. Of course, foreign affairs and defense are going to also really dominate, as you mentioned. The tension between both Moscow and Washington is really hard to navigate. But But when you think about the economy, energy is such a primary input. He will have to surely take an interest.
Yes, you're right. But then again, what does that mean? Germany has the highest household electricity prices in the European Union, and also high prices when it comes to business. Now, that is largely due to our taxes and tariffs and levies that we have on top of the electricity price that comes from the wholesale market. So at the end of the day, it's about getting rid of those taxes and levies. And paying them through the budget instead of putting them on electricity bills, which means money. So the real issue that Merz is facing is where to get money, and he has been promising too much during the campaign. I mean, there were calculations by economic think tanks that his campaign was 100 billion euros short of what they were promising. And at the same time, he said, I stick to the debt brake, basically saying you shouldn't be able to make any real debt except for 0.35% of GDP. Now, that is his real issue, and that then plays also into the energy issue. He desperately needs to find money, and he'll probably have to raise our debt.
The debt brake might not be something that perhaps everyone is familiar with. It's a sort of how legislatively firm is that? I mean, it's basically explain what it is and then tell us how hard it is to change it.
Well, we have in Europe those fiscal rules that say you shouldn't have more debt than additional debt per year than 3% of your GDP. Now, the German debt brake, the debt rules, are even tighter. We in our constitution, it says 0.35%. Now, that is crazy. Every economist outside of Germany says you guys are just nuts. But it has been kind of the main narrative of the conservative and liberal economic policy of the past years. Now, he needs to get rid of it in order to find money, mostly for defense, but then also a bit for energy. And for that, he'll need 2/3 of majority because he has to change the constitution. Now, that is now the key issue. He'll need the Greens for that. And even if in the new Bundestag, Social Democrats, Christian Democrats, and Greens are not enough to have 2/3. So he'll also need some votes of the left party or the AfD. Now, that is a situation that's not comfortable, and he'll be from day one on, in a situation where he wanted to just rule through, and now he'll need to negotiate with Greens and left he doesn't like.
But this is really interesting because, everybody's talking about national debt, and but countries like Germany, who are stable, you're not going anywhere, your borders are there, you can borrow forward from the future and invest now for growth, right? And it's really curious because amongst all the rhetoric in Washington, you've just seen a huge reconciliation bill being pushed through that involves a higher debt and more borrowing in the US because everybody recognizes that actually we need to inject more capital into the economy in order to grow. And it does seem very peculiar that this is in your constitution. It's such a tenet of German sort of philosophy that it's
Bryony, German economists are just crazy. I mean, that is it's just unbelievable how, if you look at the economic profession in Germany, they have a kind of created a little, I would say, sect of people that kind of believe fiscal austerity is the only way forward in life. And they have managed in a certain historical situation to put that into our constitution. And now it's really hard to get rid of it. Also because it has been such a narrative that has been so powerful among the conservatives and the liberals. So yes, I totally agree. It's crazy. It's one of those things where the rest of the world is looking at Germany thinking, what are those guys doing? And I have to agree, it is a peculiar thing.
And so,
A
but
bit like the Autobahn and the tempo limit thing.
you mean the fact you can drive at any speed you like on the motorway?
Yeah. We're also the only ones in the world who do that. So
Yeah.
I guess every nation has its crazy elements. That's ours.
Yeah, but it's quite a big one. And I suppose what you're saying, and I think this is going to be really interesting, is he may need to break this for defense reasons, right? And defense reasons will be popular on the right potentially, although I don't know what the AfD would make of it because they're weird. But then you guys, the Greens and maybe the Die Linke, the sort of left, you're going to want it spent on investment into socially progressive, capital projects. And so is there a way in which he has to break this piece of policy? He has to then move forward with more defense spending, but also more environmental investments and more energy infrastructure investments.
Essentially, yes. Essentially, that is the way forward, because Greens will agree to a combination of defense and environmental subsidy programs, infrastructure subsidies, stuff like that, getting down energy bills, basically. But of course, that then involves a lot of money, and that will be his mental challenge to basically throw away everything he has been saying the past 10 years and say, well, now I'm in government, I seize up to the real challenges, and I'll do that. And I mean, the left, the Linke, they're very skeptical on anything that is to do with defense. So at the end of the day, probably the only way forward would be to just not say for which purpose the money will be spent, but just get rid of that German tax break.
Yeah, well, something to watch. Let's focus on another perhaps quirk of German the German personality, which is your car industry, which is something that again, it's not a huge driver of growth that it once was, proportionately, I'm sure, in the economy, but it still captures the imagination. There are these German brands. It's a topic that excites a lot of attention. What if anything is this new government going to do on this debate around the future of the car industry?
I guess it's a two-fold strategy. On the one hand, 2025 is a year where European CO2 car regulations are getting tougher. We would in all over Europe have to comply with tougher standards, meaning more electric vehicles have to be part of your fleet, and quite some German car manufacturers are not going to meet those tougher standards. So at the end, the question that currently is up is, will they then have to pay the penalty? Now, there's already huge lobbying underway for the European Commission to propose some way of having that penalty being able to use 2026 and 2027 sales also to count to 2025 and thereby evade any penalties. So that's going to be pushing for German car industries to somehow get through 2025. On the other hand, it is very clear the only way for the German car industry to survive is now to move fast forward into electric vehicles. Now, the question is, have Merz and his people already understood that fully? We've witnessed that while they were vocally against electric vehicles and the phase out of ICEs by 2035 and all that, that suddenly Söder, the Bavarian prime minister, came up with, well, we might need some electric vehicle subsidies for the next few years. And that is because BMW has told him we need that. So I guess once German car industry clearly says what they need in order to survive, given the fact that they are about to lose the Chinese market completely. So this is about saving the European market and maybe parts of the US market. I guess once they really tell Merz and Söder what they need, we'll see a push towards some form of subsidy program for electric vehicles.
And just to bring this back to sort of the economy and the fact that, you know, when we go back to the results, AfD did extraordinarily well. This is the alternative for Deutschland in the eastern part of Germany, the traditionally poorer part of Germany, the part that perhaps is feeling that their standard of living is reduced. Is there some way in which a government can position electric vehicles as for the people, like as a cheaper alternative, helping with their energy crisis, cost of living related cost increases?
I totally agree. And if you look at why are the Norwegians all buying electric cars? Because it's cheaper. I mean, the way the Norwegians did it was the sales tax on electric vehicles was set to 0. So electric vehicles and internal combustion cars were more or less same price. But electricity was so much cheaper than diesel or gasoline that it was cheaper to use an electric car. Now, that is exactly the way forward. I'd say we need in Germany, but essentially everywhere. There is no ideology around cars, I believe, for 90% of the people. If the electric car is cheaper, then they'll buy it. And so the way forward is then have cheaper electric cars. And there we have to admit the car industry wasn't good. They were always selling 40,000 euro plus electric cars and none in the area of 25,000, which is now changing. So we see more and more models in that space of 25,000 and below. And the second thing is, of course, cheaper electricity for those cars. So those are the two strategies, and that then goes back to where does the money come from. But with those two strategies, I believe you can get a very quick adoption rate of electric cars and also electric trucks. That is just currently already underway, that is cheaper to run. So we need basically the infrastructure for e-truck charging.
You know, it strikes me that Germany, like China, you know, you've not got lots of oil reserves. You're not an oil state, so you know your electricity production is getting cleaner. It's also getting more weather variable. Therefore, there are times when charging your car will be probably negatively priced, right? So you should be becoming an electro state in the same way that China is, and if you can tilt that towards where it's needed most in the parts of the country which are feeling they're not economically prosperous, that's surely a win-win-win. And interestingly, then, from a geopolitical perspective, if you're being squeezed by Moscow and Washington, I mean, Beijing is the home of the cheap vehicle, that cheap electric vehicles are being made in China. Will Germany change its stance on tariffs and try and get Europe to see sense that actually it's good for the world if we're seeing a wider selection of cars, more affordable cars, and we move beyond this very expensive dependence on oil?
Well, I think I should invite you to coalition treaty talks here in Berlin, because it's sometimes better if the preacher doesn't come from within. But yeah, essentially that is the challenge. Of course, when it comes to the tariffs, that's double-sided, right? If we had cheaper electric cars, consumers would very much like it. But then again, that's a threat to the German car manufacturing industry. So I guess the stance that the European Commission has been now taking to basically have tariffs on Chinese e-vehicles for some years is the attempt to buy time for the European car industry. That won't go on forever. So it's really the next 3, 4, or 5 years where the European and the German car industry has to basically move fast forward. And then once that market is open, hopefully customers are somewhat have been gotten used to German brands. Yeah. By the way, I mean, we always thought it would be Tesla leading the German e-vehicle market. Now with Elon Musk being so crazy, that brand has massively lost here in Germany, and might just be what Volkswagen needed. So things are crazy these days.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe we should just pause there for a second and explain the Elon Musk craziness, because it was extraordinary, right? Wasn't it? That he not just got involved in German politics, but he also tell us the story about the press release that he wrote using his AI tools. Like it is worth just explaining this to our listeners, because it's so extraordinary. His backing of AFD.
I mean, it started, as you would imagine, with a tweet. So Elon Musk twittered the sentence, "Only the AfD can save Germany, our right-wing extremists." And of course, there was uproar. And then our very conservative-leaning right newspaper, Die Welt, invited him to write an op-ed on why he thinks only the AfD can save Germany. Now that op-ed then was published, and it was a bit strange reading it. And then people checked with Elon Musk's artificial intelligence and write an article why only the AfD can save Germany, and it was more or less exactly what we had seen in Die Welt. So Elon basically asked his AI to justify his crazy move, but it didn't stop there. So he then had an hour Twitter space with Alice Weidel, the front-running candidate of the AfD, and then he had a Showtime event basically at the AfD manifesto event. So that was really spooky. You have to look that up on YouTube. It had Big Brother vibes with Elon Musk on a big screen, and then the masses cheering at him. So everyone who doesn't want to be associated with AfD and right-wing populism is not buying a Tesla anymore, and which is 80% of the population. The AfD is strong, but it's only 20%. So he really destroyed that brand.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Silicon Valley, so every third car is a Tesla. But you're seeing these stickers emerging which say, "I bought this before I knew." Like it's just, they're still great cars, but the brand is suffering, right? And I mean, if that's going to have an effect, I'd have thought, as you say, if people are being able to choose alternatives. Anyway, yes. So, and we should just double click maybe on AfD and quite how extraordinary they are. I mean, they are. Even the German government, I think, classed them as an extremist group, right? This is not just a sort of mild, slightly right wing, government. They've got extraordinary links to quite dark tendencies.
All over Europe, we have those right wing parties, and Germany was in a way late to the show when you already had Le Front National in France, or the Sweden Democrats, and also, of course, in Italy, Meloni. But the difference is, in the other countries, once they were somewhat relevant at 15-20%, they kind of reduced their tone. So not being that extreme anymore in the attempt to really move towards 30+%. AfD is different. AfD has basically every year become more right-wing, more radical, and they have been campaigning basically on so-called remigration, which means we want all foreigners that we deem are not fit to live in Germany to leave the country. And if you have a German citizenship, but we don't think you're deemed to be here, then you also have to leave your country. So it is really frightening that they now have these high numbers, and I would presume they become even more radical over the next years. So yes, that is worrying. It is still only 20%. But it will be important for the next years that Social Democrats and Christian Democrats really perform well, have a good economic policy, that at least that's no reason to move to the right.
I mean, in addition to having this extraordinarily xenophobic and racist attitude, and some of the adverts, I don't recommend anyone watching them, but they are incredibly racist and very distressing, but they're also incredibly anti-Europe, right? And the leader, who's an extraordinary woman for lots of weird reasons, but she lives in Switzerland and seems to have a great love of Moscow. So, and they're very anti-Europe. So it can't. It's an extraordinary mix, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. I mean, they've in their manifesto that they want to leave the euro and also have the European Union be some sort of economic alliance, but no political union anymore. And that would be the end of Europe, because essentially, I mean, there were lots of Russian bots that pushed them in the election. And AfD members of parliament have been traveling to Moscow the past 3 years of the war on a regular basis. So basically, yes, we kind of had that saying that the left was in the 1980s steered by Moscow. Now it's the right. That the fifth column, as we were saying, is basically directly steered by Putin. It's strange.
But to bring this back to energy then, Patrick, because
Yes.
it is such a fascinating time. What is this going to mean, though? Because obviously gas policy and access to cheap gas is still a fundamental need for the German economy. And, some are saying, well, if there's peace in Ukraine, it's still a big if, then, the gas pipes could start flowing. Where will this new coalition, where will Friedrich Merz land on the question of energy and especially in relation to gas?
On the electricity sector, I would expect things to be more or less moving in the same direction as before. Maybe we touch on it later. There will be some sort of nuclear research program or something like that, but I doubt that there's any.
We don't want to dwell on it, but he did say that he wanted to stop the vandalism of dismantling them, which I thought was quite a good line, but you might disagree.
Well, no, you won't find any of those three companies that owns the nuclear power plants to want to stop that, because they have, of course, an agreement with the local authorities, which step is now taken to dismantle it when. So if Friedrich Merz says, I'll stop that, he would then have to pay for it, because you have firms operating there, you paid them. So the first thing he would have to answer is, where do the millions come from that are needed to stop the dismantling? And then the second is, how much would it cost to bring them back online? I'm certain it is billions of euros. And then so it's billions of euros. Bringing them back online probably takes at least 5 years, maybe longer, because they don't have a valid certification anymore.
Certificate, yeah.
So I know there are lots of people who dream of nuclear. I know that's one of the difference between you and me, Bryony. But just looking at it from a purely neutral, rational point of view, I don't see it. I don't see anyone wanting to engage in that who has basically no.
I hear you, Patrick, and this is something we disagree on. But all I'd say is that to turn them off in the height of an energy crisis, where we're trying to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, was, I think, crazy, utterly crazy. And you can argue it was all planned, but it was just the wrong call. Now, will it come back? I suspect it's going to be too hard. But what I am quite interested in is what does this change in terms of Germany's relationship with nuclear at a European level? If Poland wants to go ahead and build nuclear reactors, which it says it does, Germany should not stop that, right? In fact, if anything, it should be supportive.
Well, I guess Germany will just say, go ahead. And same with France or others.
Which is already an improvement. Which is already an improvement.
Which is a difference to the past government, I agree.
Yeah.
But on a personal note, I don't believe that a lot of these projects ever will appear because they're so darn expensive. So at the end of the day, you only buy nuclear power plants if you want to have the nuclear bomb. Everyone else, it's just a waste of money. But let's not delve into that. That's a different session.
Let's go back to gas then, which is
gas. Yes. I mean, we had to get rid of Russian gas, which was 50% of our gas demand, the gas imports, within just months. And that was a crazy time back in 2022. Now it is basically Norwegian gas plus LNG imports from all over the world, either directly in German LNG terminals or via Netherlands or Belgium. Now, if there was some sort of truce, I don't believe peace actually, in Ukraine, it could be that one part of the deal, the Trump, Putin, Zelensky deal, is that Russian gas will be going through the Ukrainian pipeline. I don't believe in Nord Stream 1 or 2, but through the Ukraine pipeline back to Europe. That would, of course, increase the supply to the European market and thereby lower gas prices. So if that was an option, I would suspect Merz would really support that. It's not that Germany had special price treatments with the Russians. The price contracts, the gas contracts with Gazprom were indexed to the TTF gas price of the Netherlands. And that is now basically the LNG price that you have at the ports of Europe. So in essence, it would just be more supply to the European market, which everyone would find good if the Ukraine got money from the transition of the gas.
I mean, one thing that perhaps is underestimated is the degree to which this is just a price that's rises to the level of the global market clearing price, and so the Russian gas wasn't necessarily cheap, and nor is the imported gas via LNG from the US. It all clears.
Well, we had that period in 2018, 2019 where we had really low gas prices in Europe. And that was then both the imported LNG from the US, which was then mainly consumed in France and Spain and somewhat in the Netherlands, and the Russians. And it was a time with large supply. So the question is really, would we come back to that situation, or do the Russians and the Americans have an interest in higher prices? That might well be the case. And now with this new crazy coalition, it might well be that you find Putin and Trump in some sort of coalition against Europe. Please pay.
Yeah. The other thing that Europe could do, which, if I were Friedrich Merz, I'd perhaps be picking up the phone to neighbours in Holland, is bring back the Groningen gas field. Because that was contributing quite a lot to that surplus, to that feeling of abundance.
Well, it's nicely said. If you're sitting in San Francisco, if you're living in Groningen, there were earthquakes every other day. I mean, there is a reason why it was stopping, because it is at the end of its lifetime. There is still gas below, but from now on, getting the gas out of Groningen means a lot of earthquakes.
Yeah, but let's not. These are not seismic earthquakes like San Francisco experiences. These are like the rumbling of a train underground that you'd experience if you lived in a city.
And cracks in your houses, and who pays for those cracks in the houses?
But my wider point, though, is that this is partly why people get frustrated by, this this amalgamation of issues where we want cheap energy, we want climate change solved, but we can't put up with, some earth tremors, which I agree. If it was
we could just reduce gas demand. How about that?
All right. Well, let's come on to that, because let's talk about the topic of heat pumps, because that became. I'm sure you don't want to talk about heat pumps, but can you talk us through what's going on with regards to electrification of heat in Germany? Because it was quite a heated topic, wasn't it?
It was, and at the end of the day, I quit government also because of that discussion. Well, everyone who is in the business knows that heat pumps is 50%, if not more, of the solution to decarbonizing the heat market. And essentially, because Germany has the 2045 climate neutrality target, and any heating installation lasts 20 years, at least, or longer in terms of its lifetime, the logic of our proposed law was any new heating installation as of 2025 has to have at least 65% renewables, which wouldn't have meant a lot of heat pumps. And there was a huge campaign against it, one of the largest campaigns ever in German politics, leading to a massive delay and watering down of the law. And subsequently, the installation rate of heat pumps dropped last year to basically 2019 levels. It was hard to see for all those that cared about climate. Now we don't have that obligation in the law anymore. It'll only come into effect a few years down the line, but we do still have a subsidy program, which is now gradually receiving a lot of demand. And I believe in 2025, we'll have heat pump installation rates going back up to some, let's say, 250,000, maybe 300,000 units out of a market that has 700 units of installation, heating installations per year. So at the end of the day, we need to have 500,000 plus of heat pumps. We'll get there eventually, but it is a tough battle in all countries where the gas industry is strong. So in Europe, that means UK, Netherlands, and Germany are having tough battles on heat pumps versus gas heating.
How did that campaign manifest itself? And have you had a chance to do a bit of reflection now that you're out of government on how could it have been handled better?
I've been thinking about that a lot, and it would be an own session probably just on that. But I'd say the main element which we were internally planning was that you have to combine that what you need to do with subsidies. So essentially, a heat pump in Germany costs some 25 to 30,000 euros, including installation, and a gas installation is around 10,000. So it is 15 to 20,000 euros more expensive, and people were asking why. Rightly so. Plus, then the campaign said, "Oh yeah, but heat pumps don't work in old houses, so they will require you to renovate your building. That will cost 300,000 euros. So there were lots of lies around it as well. And that was then a campaign we couldn't win once all those lies were the main narrative. But if you'd want to really win such a debate, I'd say it is about, as we were saying on electric cars, it has to be a heat pump and a gas boiler have to be at the same price level, and electricity is cheaper. To heat with electricity is cheaper than gas. And there have been quite some studies saying that means electricity should not cost more than double what gas costs per kilowatt hour. So in essence, if gas is at 10 cents per kilowatt hours in Europe for a private household, then electricity shouldn't be more expensive than 20 cents per kilowatt hours. And I think that is the way forward. And that will also be the challenge for the new coalition. Are they able to bring down electricity prices? And are we able to bring down heat pump prices?
And when you were looking at this topic, Patrick, because we did a brilliant episode on cleaning up with Tamsin Lishman, who's the CEO of a company in the UK called Kenza, and they offer kind of street scale or large block of flat scale heat pumps, which end up being much less costly per unit, per individual household. And the nice thing about it is you can put it in with maybe half the street saying yes, and then if you've got a brand new boiler and you don't want to change it yet, you just join as and when it's right for you economically. And it's and it's less disruptive because it's, 2 drill holes and some pipes, and then you have in your house a small box. And that always felt to me like much closer to what the gas model is. It's kind of network of providers. It's less disruptive, and it has a better efficiency gain as well.
That is a very interesting solution that you're proposing. On the other hand, it also requires to open up the street and have that additional water pipeline there, right? So there are pros and cons of the different technologies, and we now have heat pumps that work in basically every building. I guess, yes, you could wait for heat pumps, also solutions in every situation. But at the same time, those innovations come because there is demand. And that kind of situation we're in, where if you want to really get down European greenhouse gas emissions in the heating sector, then essentially you have to move fast forward on heat pumps. And it is a proven technology in Scandinavia, everywhere. It's just that in Germany and the UK, we've been told it doesn't work for our houses. So,
or we've been told, don't worry, we've got it. Hydrogen's going to be the answer.
Yeah,
but let's
hydrogen. I love the hydrogen souffle story of you and Michael Liebrecht. And yes, it's nowhere coming near. Yeah.
Cleaning Up is brought to you by the members of our leadership circle. That's Actis, Alcazar Energy, Davidson Kempner, Ecopragma Capital, EDP of Portugal, Euroelectric, the Gilardini Foundation, KKR, National Grid, Octopus Energy, Quadrature Climate Foundation, STCL, and Wärtsilä. For more information on the Leadership Circle, please visit cleaningup.live. That's cleaningup.live. If you're enjoying Cleaning Up, please make sure that you subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. That really helps other people to find us. Please recommend Cleaning Up to your friends and colleagues and sign up for our free newsletter at cleaninguppod.substack.com. That's cleaninguppod.substack.com.
Patrick, also just on this question of kind of Germany's place in the world, we've seen a lot of discussion about retrenching, pulling back overseas spending. The UK looks set to follow that pattern. What's Germany's line going to be? Because it has been a big supporter of overseas development for obvious reasons. The GIZ is a well-known funder of progressive infrastructure and projects overseas. What's your prognosis on that?
I fear that Merz, because of all those debt break issues, will also come forward with cuts on our ODA and external financing. I don't think it'll be that much because Social Democrats are in that ministry and they are very much defending that. So it might be a slight cut, but no increase. And we know that, for example, for climate finance, an increase would be necessary.
And then just turning domestically, Germany's got a legally binding commitment to net zero by 2045 and some pretty challenging targets by 2030. I think it's a 65% cut. How likely is it that 2030 in particular seems very close? Is this election going to affect that ability to meet those targets?
Well, if you look at basically how our sectors are doing, emissions in the energy sector have been going down considerably. We are on the path to phase out coal by 2030. So energy really is performing well. Building and transport, not at all. We are lacking far behind when it comes to heat pumps, electric cars, district heating, and everything in that space. And I don't think we'll get that done by 2030. So I'd say it will be very difficult to get the 2030 targets done, but the huge cuts in the energy sector might compensate for some of the shortfalls in building and transport.
That's going to need a huge increase in renewable power, right? We've talked about the fact that nuclear is not coming back, very unlikely. To get rid of the gas, which will be remaining after the coal shuts, you've got to see a huge build out of wind and solar. Has Germany got enough land? Have we got enough spaces to put all of this?
Well, the target that the last government has set was 80% renewables by 2030. And I'd say the new government will stick to that target. And what we have been doing in that past 3 years is really speeding up every permitting process you can think of in the renewable space. And we have now in solar installation rates of 15 plus gigawatts per year. It'll move towards 20. It's just amazing what's going on. And in wind, it has took a while, but now the permits are there that we have more than 12 gigawatts of permits per year. So those are projects where there is the land already secured, where the permitting process is through. Now they'll go into the auctions of the renewable scheme, and then they'll be built. So me personally, I'm quite confident that 80% target by 2030 will be reached. And then really emissions will be going down, and we'll finally have reduced electricity bills because the wholesale power market price will go down with so many wind and solar zero marginal cost technologies in the power system.
And presumably the batteries you need to then absorb it when.
And the batteries will come on their own. That is just a market thing. They'll exploit the issue that power prices are zero in summer at noon, and then go back up at 6 p.m. And there's a lot of money to be made on the power market. They'll be built.
Yeah, and of course, more electric vehicles would also absorb those.
Yes.
How much of that plan, though, Patrick, relies on more grid infrastructure? I mean, Germany famously doesn't really have an integrated grid system.
We do have one. We just have a lot of bottlenecks.
Okay, we do too. That's okay.
Yes, there is a lot of additional north-south power lines needed, but also there we were having lots of permitting process speeding up elements. So I would assume that always is lacking 2-3 years, but we'll have that done by 2030. The discussion that is now coming up is we won't have electricity demand as high as we thought it would be in 2030, because electrification of heat and transport is slower than expected. So then are we having all that electricity and no one who wants it? So that's the discussion that is coming up now. But I'd say it all will work out because wind offshore is also taking longer than we thought. So at the end of the day, there is quite a challenge to get everything done. But in those past 3 years, we basically have given all the necessary things that it can be done. So if Merz is somehow sensible, he'll just continue and then be the star who had 80% renewables at the end of his legislative period.
But let's hope it's also then led to, as you say, a reduction in the costs, because the challenge is during this kind of complex transition, which is going to take decades, there's turbulence. There's times in which your capital expenditure is outstripping the savings, and it's not being felt in the public purse. So I think the really crucial thing is getting those bills and getting people to benefit from
Yes.
electrification and getting their bills down overall.
Totally agree.
I wanted to talk about Germany's role in Europe and this is relevant to what we just talked about. In the Fit for 55 package, which is the Europeans' kind of flagship climate and energy policy, we're going to be bringing in both the transport and the heat sectors into an emissions trading scheme. Now, what could happen to that policy? Because it's been signed off, but now we've had all this turbulence and change politically. Where do you think Germany will take that?
Now, it was essentially Germans and German Christian Democrats in the European Parliament that have been pushing the ETS on building and transport. So Germany can't just give up on it. On the other hand, we know that everyone in Eastern Europe wants to get rid of that instrument. And also France was never really fond of it. So there will be a huge push to have a look at it again. And I believe once the right-wing press in Germany realizes what is coming up in 2027 with additional CO2 prices on transport and heat, there will be a huge pressure. Now that means I don't think it will be abandoned, but it means we'll have to have a closer look on what are the measures within the ETS2 that somehow make sure that prices don't just go through the roof. We do have a CO2 price for building and transport in European law, in German law, but is only rising by 10 euros per year. And I can imagine that is kind of the thing that also the rest of Europe would accept, that yes, there needs to be a CO2 price on heating and transport, but it shouldn't be too high and it shouldn't have sudden changes. So 10 euro per ton of CO2, which translates into some 3 cents per liter of diesel or gasoline, that's per year as an increase, okay, but not more, which would mean open up the ETS directive again. So I expect that to be a major discussion in 25 and 26 in Brussels.
Let's hope nobody from your right-wing parties are watching this podcast because they're going to know about it now. But I do think there's a question here, though, about how Europe could adjust itself so that it can help make Europe feel like they were all in this together. Because at the moment, that policy is somewhat separate from the other carbon price that's on the power sector. But if you could imagine southern and eastern states moving faster on decarbonizing their power sector, and that could act as a price break on the carbon price on the harder to abate sectors or the transport and heat sectors where there's perhaps it's a harder we're a bit further behind, right? So if Europe as a whole introduces some flexibility so that the countries who are moving fastest benefit, maybe there's some flexibilities there between the different markets and prices.
Yeah, of course, that's one of the ideas, to basically have ETS1 and ETS2 linked and some emissions rights exchanged there. But don't underestimate price increase potential in the ETS1. Once we have got rid of coal in Europe, then the harder part begins, which is getting rid of gas in the power sector and getting rid of CO2 in industry. And that might just then also increase prices in ETS1. So we are now getting into that phase where the cheap elements of getting rid of CO2 are suddenly gone. There's still some coal, and that will be the next thing. But at the end of the 2020s, we are basically in a world where the harder to pick cherries come, And I believe electrifying heat and transport is easy. So let's focus on that. Electric cars, heat pumps, that's the way forward also to get down prices in ETS too.
Yeah, well, that's a good hopeful reminder that actually, your economists, your crazy German economists would say the best possible thing would be to put this all under one price mechanism, and then those things do flow out, right?
And then the AfD has 40+%. I guess that's what everyone is afraid of.
That if you did it in the most logical way, emotionally, people would be turned against it. And that is exactly where we're at, right? We know the logic that the logic of this makes complete sense, but it's emotionally highly charged, and that ability to scare people is always easier to scare people than it is to make people feel good about what they've already normalized,
Yeah, I mean, and it's the economic efficient solution. Everyone who is in that space knows that. But if you do surveys and ask them what kind of climate policy do you support, then higher taxes on CO2 is always the one thing that nobody likes. So politicians know that as well.
Maybe what we should be doing, though, is talking more about the revenues, right? Because if you auctioned, I don't even know what ETS2 is planning.
We do.
If you auction it and make sure that money is visible, making pollution expensive is popular. But then what do you do with the money is then the question, isn't it? How you make people feel that this is something that benefits them. And giving them electric cars would benefit them. So that's what we should do.
So that's basically coming back to our the beginning of our conversation. Make the goods cheap. Make the ones that are climate friendly. Have them be the cheaper option, and then people will love it and people will buy it. I guess that is the main politics of climate to go forward.
Exactly. And why I sometimes, why I feel there's light amongst all the gloom is that because the core technologies, batteries, solar power, wind, the prices have come down to such an extent that is actually now a win-win for everybody. And Europe is just starting now with that realization that, yes, these things might be coming from China, but they're reducing our costs and it's making us more resilient. And I'm confident that's going to carry on.
And coming back to the question of how does this election play out for German energy policy, because the technological developments are, just as you said, I don't expect that much of a change. So we'll see, but I'd say expect continuity in German energy policy.
Well, that's a great point to end on. Thank you so much, Patrick. Been a pleasure as always. Let's stay in touch and hopefully we can revisit this in a little while and see whether that prognosis is correct.
Bye-bye. It was fun.
So that was Patrick Graichen, former State Secretary in the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Protection, and founder and head of the Agora Energiewende think tank. It feels as if energy policy has never been more volatile, and I'm not sure I'm as sanguine as Patrick about Europe and Germany carrying on as usual with their climate targets and Energiewende. But if there's a way of clearly delivering lower prices to consumers thanks to more renewables coupled with affordable electric vehicles and electric heating, then there will be less need for those targets. As usual, we'll include links in the show notes, including to episode 154 with Tamsin Lishman, CEO of Kenza Heat Pumps. My thanks as ever to Oscar Boyd, our producer, our editor, Jamie Oliver, and the growing team who make Cleaning Up podcast and Leadership Circle possible. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please join us next week for another episode of Cleaning Up.
Cleaning Up is brought to you by the members of our Leadership Circle. That's Actis, Alcazar Energy, Davidson Kempner, Ecopragma Capital, EDP of Portugal, Euroelectric, the Gilardini Foundation, KKR, National Grid, Octopus Energy, Quadrature Climate Foundation, STCL, and Wärtsilä. For more information on the Leadership Circle, please visit cleaningup.live. That's cleaningup.live. If you're enjoying Cleaning Up, Please make sure that you subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. That really helps other people to find us. Please recommend Cleaning Up to your friends and colleagues and sign up for our free newsletter at cleaninguppod.substack.com. That's cleaninguppod.substack.com.